Hi everyone, this video is on the Kreddle, which I've been intrigued about for a long time, but I'm so happy with my own Chinrest that I didn't want to buy one, so I talked the inventor into sending me one and he agreed. So this isn't really a product review, I'm just going to show you how it works. I'm going to show you the different angles and axes that can be achieved with this Chinrest. A lot of my students have tried these out and they've become frustrated, saying it's too hard, it's too confusing. It's really not if you know about the basic axes and the different controls that give you options over each axis. Now, when you're shopping for Chinrests, you need to know a few things about yourself and about fitting a violin to your body. You know, a lot of students don't even know where to begin because they don't know what normal is. Some players play with their violins far out to the left, some play with them more at a 45-degree angle. That's dependent on the length of your arms, because a shorter person is going to play with their violin more to the front just so that they can pull a straight bow. I'm short, I'm 5'2". And when I'm out at the tip, if my violin were clear out here, then I have to extend my arm even further. So instead of extending our bow arm, we bring our violin in to accommodate our arm length. Tall people can get away with playing out there and they feel better out there because they've got room. So that's one thing you need to understand is the angle of the violin from your body. You also need to understand what the Chinrest's job is. The Chinrest's job is to take up the space from your jawbone to your collarbone. Ideally, we want our violin to rest on our collarbone. That's how players without shoulder rests play. Their violin balances on their collarbone. And those of us who play with shoulder rests should be no different. The violin rests on the collarbone, which means the Chinrest needs to come up and meet our jaw without us having to clamp down and turn our neck and do weird things. So you want to kind of start with the Chinrest and find the height that you need, then figure out what you need under here. That would be probably the second step that I would recommend on this quest for violin comfort. Finally, you need to know whether you are a type of person who's going to play with your face facing forward, which is what I do, or if you're trained to turn your head to the left slightly. Myself included, a lot of teachers teach the nose to point the direction of the scroll. So if your violin is at a 45-degree angle, then your nose would never be further than where your scroll is pointing. So everything is pointing down the barrel of the fingerboard. Okay, but that's not how I play. I play facing forward because I'm an orchestral musician, but I do teach my students to point their nose down the fingerboard. So keep that in mind when you're trying to fit a Chinrest, because that does impact where your jawbone gets positioned. Ultimately, I like to find a Chinrest that can accommodate a range of head motion with great comfort. You don't ever want to be just locked into one position that's comfortable. That's not going to be good. Okay, so with that little bit of background information out of the way, let's proceed. So if you were to buy a Kreddle Chinrest, you'd get most of what you are seeing here. You get 4 Chinrest posts, all of different heights, which is nice, so that you can experiment with various heights. A lot of us don't exactly know what height we need. You get 2 Chinrest plates. They're slightly different. We'll discuss that in a second. You get an Allen wrench and a Chinrest wrench, and you need to specify which of these 2 you want with your Chinrest. This one is a center mount. This one is a side mount. And you can see the center mount has a tunnel or a hump right there. to go over the tailpiece. We'll discuss that more in a second. And this one does not have the little tunnel. It's a side mount chin rest bracket. And you'd need to specify which of these two you want. And you get to choose what kind of metal comes on the mount between stainless steel or nickel. Okay, so let's discuss the differences between these. These are the chin plates. I think this taller one is the original, and it has the chin rest assembly underneath. This is where all of this other stuff attaches. So, but if you were to change this plate for this plate, Jordan has made his chin rests really versatile, and I saw a video of him demonstrating swapping out the chin rest plate. Okay, so that's those. Now, what's the difference? They're pretty much the same from the top. This one seems slightly bigger. I'd have to measure it, but it does seem slightly bigger. But that's inconsequential. I think the biggest difference is the view from the back. Now, you probably don't even remember which was the original, but I'll tell you in a second. First of all, tell me which one is fatter on this side. This isn't the best workspace. Can you see this compared to that? There's a good comparison angle. You can see that this one is taller by far, and it has more of that Stuber hump on it, which of course I gravitated to because I love my Stuber. So this is more of a flatter plate. See that? And this one is more contoured. It's got a fatter hump and more of a dip. This is the one I'm going to be demonstrating. Okay, now, these two chin rest brackets, they're different. One is a center-mounted chin rest. This one is a side-mounted chin rest. You can easily tell the difference on any chin rest because a center mount has to have a big tunnel for your tailpiece to go under. So this would clamp right where your tailpiece goes. This clamps beside the tailpiece. Let me just show you real quick. My violin, I use a side mount. I don't prefer it, it's all I can get in the Stuber. So my chin rest clamps right here. Now, I didn't do all that damage. The maker did that on purpose because she thought it looked really cool. The center mount would go right like that, right over the tailpiece. So when you look at a chin rest, you can recognize right away whether it's center mounted or side mounted. And I think it's really cool that Jordan made his chin rest so versatile that you could choose side or center. Technically, the center mount is better for the violin and better for the sound because there's a wood block inside the violin right under here. And that gives more sturdiness to withstand the pressure of the chin rest clamp, and it dampens the sound less. The side mount, you have to be really careful because the only thing you're mounting to is the ribs, and you can damage the violin if you clamp down too hard. So, like I said, I'd probably use a center mount if I could, but I can't, so I'm just really careful with my side mount. Let me just show you how minimal I like to clamp my chin rest down. I'm really used to how my Stuber should perform. So I clamped it to where, if I need to, I could force a tiny bit of movement. That means it's not too tight. If I were unable to get that little creaking movement, I'd be nervous that it was too tight, especially on a side mount. So yeah, so that's just a little good test to see if you can get just a little squeak of movement. You're probably good. It's not going to fall off, but it's not going to damage your violin. Also, one thing to be very careful of when you're messing around with chin rests is to make sure that the screws, can you see the grain of the screws? Those are awfully close to the edge of my violin. If I let them touch right against the edge of my violin, they're gonna just grind away at that wood So you want just a little bit of airspace between the screws and the actual wood. Just enough for a piece of paper to get through is all you need. So be careful of that. Now I'm going to demonstrate with the side mount bracket because it's my preference. But everything I'm going to talk about is equally applicable to this bracket as well. I'm going to be talking about a single screw adjustment. There's the single screw on the side mount, and there's the single screw on the center mount. So it's still, everything will still apply. Okay, now these guys here, you see that they're different heights. I'm going to be using the shortest one because I already know that I'm going to need as short as possible. Let's take a look at these arms. Now, the cool thing about these arms, you see how they're shaped? We have a ball end, which is up here. That's the ball end, and we have a tubular end. Let me show you the difference between those. So on this big one, if you take a close look, you can see that that's kind of a ball, kind of like a bone, the head of a bone. And that's going to give you 360-degree swivel for incredible versatility. And this side is more like a hollow noodle, and it gives you one plane of adjustment. And you can see it's S-shaped, which gives you a whole nother sphere of adjustment where it can spin from either side. It can spin from this end or from this end or from both ends probably, to give you a huge amount of movement and customization. Okay, so now you're familiar with the parts. Let me show you one more thing before I actually put it on my violin and start showing you specifics. I was mentioning that this has a single screw for single screw adjustments. Okay, so that's on the Chinrest bracket, but I'm also going to be referring to a 2-screw adjustment, just for the sake of calling it something. This Chinrest plate has 2 screws under here in the assembly. Can you see them? There's a good view. And that gives you a whole different set of adjustments. So I'll be referring to the 2-screw adjustments and the 1-screw adjustment. Okay, so now let me just show you how to pop your arm in to the Chinrest plate. You have to loosen these screws a lot so that you don't have to force this in. And that way it opens up really wide. You see that? And you can just set the ball, make sure it's the ball end, into that little assembly, and then tighten it up. Okay, now let me just show you really cool how this spins in this assembly. You see how that spins? That gives you an incredible amount of movement for when you're trying to find your exact right placement. So keep that in mind. And also, look at this. Because of the ball in socket, you have 360 degrees of tilt and placement. It's like our wrist. It's like our wrist can do this. That's exactly like what this ball and socket achieves. Okay, now we're going to pop this hollow piece of spaghetti into this little hole, like so. Okay, so now let me show you the different movements that the single screw and the double screw can achieve before I finally put it on my violin. So first, let's tighten one of these screws so that we only get movement from one style of adjustment. So right now we're going to discuss the 2-screw movements, the 2-screw adjustments, I guess we'll call it. The 2 screws can rotate the plate, so you can rotate it away from your jawbone or towards your jawbone, or just kind of follow your chin or your jaw to suit your personal playing position. It can tilt slightly left or right, like left side higher or right side higher. And then that cool 360-degree rotation that I told you about is possible. It says it's hard to do this in this workspace, but you can see that it's the plate is able to do really elaborate rotations. And that's due to the ball and socket, which is housed in the 2-screw assembly. Okay, now let's tighten those guys up, and I'll show you what the single screw can do. Okay, so now it's all tight and there is no movement, and that's what you'll do when you finally choose your setting. You don't want any movement once you find your spot. But I'm going to loosen the single screw and show you what it can do. So the single screw, remember, the single screw is going to spin that piece of tubing inside the hole like that. So we get on a single plane. So if you don't want this elaborate of a motion and you just want things to stay the way they are but just to spin it, then loosen the single screw and it can spin to the left or to the right on a single plane. So that's the basic adjustment you can get by just loosening the single screw. Now there's one final adjustment that you can get by loosening all 3 screws, and that's where it can get a little overwhelming, but gosh, it's more options for you. So I'm going to loosen all 3, and then I'm going to show you, you know, this little thing where it's in the hole and you can go. So if all three screws are loose, then you've got the spin of the tube in the hole, and you've got the spin of the ball and socket, and you can get this kind of adjustment. Do you see how it's spinning around like so? Now what that's going to do is it can bring the chin rest back toward you. It can bring the chin rest forward, away from you. It can swivel the chin rest to your right. It can swivel the chin rest to your left. Let me go through those one more time. So you can spin, you can rotate the chin rest away from you. You can rotate the chin rest towards you. Do you see how that's a further gap there now? Okay, or you can rotate it to the left or to the right. So side to side or forward and back. Okay, so now let me put it on my violin and we'll give you the final demonstration. Okay, so this is what the cradle looks like on my violin installed. I haven't made any really perfect adjustments yet. You can see that as it just happened to go on my violin, it sort of extends out past the violin a little bit, which would bring the chin rest closer to me without me having to crane my head forward, which is nice. But what that also means, if I indulge in that position, see how it's back here, that means, yeah, I'm clamped to the chin rest, but my violin is further away from my body. And I can't have that because I'm short enough as it is. I don't want my violin further away from me. So the first thing I'm going to figure out how to do is how to make the plate go forward, more flush with the violin. That is going to require me to loosen all 3 screws so that I can do that swinging motion. Remember, I'm going to swivel the ball and socket and the spaghetti noodle against each other to move the chin rest forward. So we'll push fast forward on this so you don't have to sit here. Okay, so I got it loosened. It's all flopping all over the place. Now I'm going to move the chin rest from being extended far beyond the body of the violin. I'm going to move it up more over the scar here. Be real careful when you're doing this because it could come apart and like that. Be really careful when you're making this adjustment. It came out and I was lucky. It brushed the wood of my violin, but it didn't scratch it. So be careful. I should have taken this out and moved it where I thought, but that can be disorienting. Basically, you want this noodle, hollow noodle, as close to this back plate as you can get it. So that's about as far forward as I'm going to be able to get it. It's an improvement, but it's still not quite flush. Okay, so I tightened it up, and it's almost flush. Okay, so that's a little better. I'm struggling right now just because the chin rest is higher than my stuber, and I love my shoulder rest. I'm not going to get rid of my shoulder rest. So I've got too much height right now, so it's not comfortable for me. But the point of this video is to show you the versatility and the possibilities for you. Okay, so now, let's say that I am unhappy with the tilt. Say I want to change my chin rest this way or that way. That can make a big difference to your jawbone. So when you want to tilt it, that requires the ball and socket. Think about it. So you need to loosen the 2-screw assembly, and then you can rock it from side to side as needed. Also, from that ball and socket motion, you could spin it from side to side. Do you see that? The spin versus the tilt. Okay, both of those are possible. Not only tilting from left to right, but tilting forward and back. That's this motion that I was telling you about. So anyway, that's the 2-screw assembly that will do that for you. Now, if you get everything exactly how you want it, then lock it up. And my favorite setting on this is with it tilted down slightly. You know why? Because that amplifies that Stuber hump. It just helps it to lock under my jawbone a little bit more. It feels pretty good. It's just too high for me. So that was with the tilting forward and back. And again, that's the ball and socket. Okay, so just to review, just differentiate between the ball and socket, which is the 2-screw assembly, or just the simple single plane rotation. That's the 1-screw assembly. And then the adjustment that can be achieved by loosening all 3 screws, which is to spin the chin rest on that little circular axis, which can slide the plate left, it can slide the plate back, it can slide the plate right, or it can slide the plate forward away from your head. That requires all 3 screws to be loosened. So in summary, I find the Kreddle Chinrest to be extremely versatile, possibly a little confusing to use, but once you keep those little axes separate in your mind, you can dial in something that can be perfect for your body and for your playing style. I also found that it wasn't great for my height of neck. However, if I were willing to give up my shoulder rest or minimize what I'm using for a shoulder rest, that would be a totally different situation. So I can't say that the Kreddle is not appropriate for short people, because it could be if you can minimize what's underneath the violin. I think the Kreddle is probably an awesome tool for people with longer necks, especially because of its ability to conform to your jawline with all of the various axes. Okay, so that's my summary of the Kreddle. I want to thank Jordan for sending me a sample of his invention, and hope this helps. All right, take care, everyone.